Any Marvel property is always ripe with Easter eggs and references. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 8 of the best Easter eggs and references in Marvel's Avengers. Starting off with a bit of a disclaimer, fair warning, we don't have access to the entire costume database because the marketplace for costumes is on a revolving timer, so we can't talk in depth about costume Easter eggs. Pretty much every legendary costume in the store is a reference to something, though. Like Kamala's costume here is a reference to her origin story. This Hulk in a Panama hat is a reference to the Mr. Fix-It era of the Hulk comic, stuff like that. Just assume if you see a weird costume on a character, it's in reference to something. That's basically how the costumes work. But for now, at least, we're just noting that we really can't get into that in any depth because of the way costumes work. Also warning you, this is going to be a spoiler-oriented video if we're talking about the campaign here, so be warned about that. Starting at number 8, all of the Easter eggs in the prologue, which you play as a young Kamala Khan. It contains like so many Easter eggs and references. It's probably the best place to start. The first prominent Easter egg is the shawarma stand, which is a direct reference to the post-credit scene in the first Avengers where all the good guys get together and eat shawarma. It's a pretty well-circulated gag at this point, so most players probably going to be familiar with that one. You'd think the arcade would have some direct game reference hidden in it somewhere, but no, actually, the games are all completely made up. Still, cute little things you can glean from here, like Captain America and the Falcon machine. Obviously, I'm biased towards that, but it doesn't have Captain America's most famous non-Bucky Barnes partner on it. It does show a classic comics accurate version of Iron Man, though, looking just as goofy as he did before they finally redesigned his costume in the early 2000s. In the Captain America booth, outside of the usual references to his history, you could find a reference to Princess Shuri of Wakanda, who, outside of being a character from Black Panther, also played a really important role in Infinity War. Also, this scene where Iron Man lands on stage to rock music and fireworks obviously feels very familiar to a scene from Iron Man 2, which is basically the same thing. At number 7, after the time skip, we see Kamala Khan's room, which contains a few Easter eggs of its own. Probably the most obvious is the poster of Captain Marvel, which I wouldn't normally draw a lot of attention to, but it's clearly a piece of artwork created specifically for the game. There are other Captain Marvel posters around the room, which are taken directly from the comics, but these two posters, one in a modern costume and one in a redesigned version of a 1978 to 2012 costume, both look like they were drawn from renders or are final pieces of concept art. Either way, it does point to her inclusion in the game at some point. Combine that with some plot elements we'll get into later, it seems certain to me she'll eventually be playable. Few more things in here too, though. This small picture shows Kamala with a boy, presumably her brother, who is mentioned but never actually shown. Looking through her stuff, you might wonder what's with the sloths. There's a cartoon sloth on her phone, pictures on her wall, her PC has that sloth on the wallpaper. Yeah, sloth stuff. Well, outside of having superpowers, she's also a fan fiction writer who goes by the name Sloth Baby. So her comic book fan fiction obsession absolutely carries over into this game. But is there explanation for the sloth fascination specifically? Well, outside of the fact she seems obsessed with them in the comics, not really. But hey, sometimes you don't really need to explain everything. She likes sloths. At number 6, the Thors Hammer Easter egg. After beating the campaign or just starting out in Avengers Assemble mode, you can go into Thor's room on the Chimera and find his famous hammer. Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor, is the spell on Thor's famous hammer. Basically, that means only Thor himself is worthy enough to pick it up, but there might be someone else who's good enough to lift the thing. Trying it out with Hulk, Iron Man, Black Widow, or Ms. Marvel, they can't make it budge at all. Of course, if you go in with Thor, he can lift the thing no problem. But if you attempt it as Captain America, he can actually get the thing to move a little bit. This is, of course, a reference to one of the best scenes in the second Avengers movie, where Thor offers people the opportunity to lift his hammer, and Steve Rogers almost looks like he's going to be able to do it. Pretty much every interactable on the Chimera gets a different bit of dialogue depending on who you're playing as, but that's definitely the most unique. At number 5, They Who Shall Not Be Named. So, playing this game, you might think something to yourself. Where's the X-Men? Okay, maybe not, because at this point I think we've all gotten used to the fact that Disney didn't own the X-Men film rights, so they never got a mention in any Disney Marvel movie, ever. Now, with the whole Fox buyout, that's all gonna change, but this game was being worked on before that buyout was even a thing, so you'd expect no X-Men to be found anywhere, with Inhumans basically standing in for mutants. But if you look closely at one of the comics in Kamala's wall in her secret base in Jersey City, you might see something you recognize. Yes, on this issue of The Incredible Hulk, there's some mutants on there, specifically Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Iceman. They're not actually the X-Men, they're the X-Force, which is completely different in its own special way. But looking how prominent this comic is displayed, the choice of cover has got to be pretty intentional, and just a little nod to the players who are probably wondering if they can get away with showing X-Men now. Number 4, signs. There are a lot of billboards and signs that reference assorted companies from the Marvel Universe, so let's just start there. In the city map, you can see signs for Alchemax, the country first introduced in Spider-Man 2099, which has since been incorporated into the regular Marvel Universe and primarily seen in the Spider-Man stories. There's a Chemco sign, a company that first appeared in Daredevil number 10, and is home to the basically forgotten supervillain team, the Animen. You gotta have a Roxxon, the energy corporation in the Marvel Universe. If you're making a Marvel game, you gotta put Roxxon in, because otherwise, how would you get any energy? You can also find the Daily Bugle, which pretty much everyone knows. It's the newspaper that Spider-Man often works for as a photographer, you know, owned by J. Jonah Jameson. Get me pictures of Spider-Man. That guy. Here's a sign showing Meacham Industries. They're enemies of Iron Fist, but one thing people probably know them for is taking up way too much screen time on the Netflix Iron Fist show. Oh, and the secret prison/science lab that Kamala sneaks into in story mode, it's called Black Mesa. Funny that, but believe it or not, it's actually not a reference to Half-Life. Marvel actually had that name first. Black Mesa was a secret AIM base in the New Mutants issue 6, which was published in 1983, which seems like a random reference, but it's literally the only time a base called Black Mesa has appeared in Marvel Comics, but whatever. Last, here's an easy one to miss. While escaping Kamala's little secret hideout in Jersey City, you can see a little convenience store called Circle Q, which you might think is just a generic store name invented for the game, but it's actually a store that features prominently in Miss Marvel comics, being the store that some of her friends worked at. It's kind of a blink and you'll miss it thing, but if you're a fan of the character, you might appreciate this. At number 3, there is an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. reference. In one of the many AIM bases in the game, you can find a reference to a specific prisoner. There's a lot of missing people names you find in the game. They're mostly generic, but one stands out, D. Johnson, which stands for Daisy Johnson, aka the superhero Quake. It seems kind of random pick until you remember she's also one of the main characters from the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV series. Also, if you've been peeking at some of the leaks surrounding this game, apparently Quake is going to be brought in as a playable character at some point in the future as well. I mean, she might just be an NPC or something, but with her unique skill set, in fact, she's another Inhuman character going to go along with the Miss Marvel stuff, it's possible that she might be playable. Right now, not certain, but either way, sneaky reference. At number 2, the framed portrait in Cap's room. In Captain America's room on the Chimera, you will find a picture of a woman. Doesn't actually say who she is, but if you've seen the movies, you'll recognize her as Peggy Carter, Cap's lost love from World War II. She actually appeared in some way in all of the Captain America movies, first as a love interest, then as an old woman in Winter Soldier, and finally ending with her funeral in Civil War. There's actually another little Easter egg in Cap's room. Above his bed, you see a drawing of Hawkeye and Kate Bishop, the new Hawkeye. It's been confirmed that Kate is going to be the first hero added to the game, so it's not too much of a tease, but a nice little detail. Oh, and speaking of S.H.I.E.L.D. characters, outside of Nick Fury and Maria Hill, another character is mentioned as a S.H.I.E.L.D. leader, Dum Dum Dugan. You might remember him as one of the Howling Commandos in the first Captain America movie, so he's famous as both being a World War II character and a modern-day S.H.I.E.L.D. character. So was he frozen like Cap? No, he's actually replaced by an LMD, a life model decoy, so he is a robot. And finally, at number 1, the entire ending. I mean, a lot of stuff goes down at the end of this game. You fight MODOK. It's revealed there's a Kree sentry hidden under San Francisco's bay. There's this whole mid-credit scene with AIM. There's so much to break down. It's not all Easter eggs, but if you aren't heavily into Marvel Comics already, you're probably not really 100% sure what's going on here. So what's a Kree Sentry? Giant alien robots that first appeared in Fantastic Four 64. But what makes it interesting is that though people were probably aware from the Kree from their Marvel Cinematic Universe appearances, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy and Captain Marvel, the discovery of the Kree Sentry, however, was actually the first time the Alien Empire was mentioned in the Marvel Comics. So really the way they introduced the Kree in the game mirrors the way they were actually originally introduced in the comics. Now, the reason there was a Kree Sentry on Earth in the comics, they were here to monitor the Inhumans, which came about in the comics for the same reason they do in the game, which, just to say, is from exposure from the mist generated by Terrigen crystals. Now, where do those come from, however? The Kree, of course, which I'm sure will come into play somehow if and when they finally do decide to fully add in the Kree to the game. Another big reveal is showing Monica Rappaccini as the Scientist Supreme of AIM. You might have thought she was some just character, like a made-up one for the game, but no, she's actually a fairly recent Marvel Comics character who, like in the game, had a relationship with Bruce Banner before becoming a villain. Just like in the game, she doesn't have like a super villain name or anything. She doesn't become a horrible monster like MODOK. She's just Monica. I mean, there's actually been a lot of Scientist Supremes introduced as leaders of AIM in the comics, but most of them have been pretty forgettable. Speaking of, those previous leaders actually get name dropped in the game as scientists working for AIM, so...
Yeah. Did Dr. Forsen and your defectors have any intel?
There's another small Easter egg. It does make sense that the newest version of the leader of AIM in the game is in fact Monica Rappaccini. She's a lot more memorable than a lot of the generic mad scientists that have previously ran AIM. At the end, we also see a beacon flying off into space coming from the destroyed Sentinel. Safe to assume we'll see the Kree Empire at some point, just due to this. But that's also heavily dependent on how good the follow-through to this story is. Oh yeah, and MODOK just fell into the water and disappears. I mean, we'll definitely see him again. That's not the end of MODOK, period. So have you found any secrets in Marvel's Avengers? Have you found these secrets? Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. The best way to see them first, of course, is a subscription. And as always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. And we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.